Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of our Navigating Turbulent Times webinar. I'm Chris Moriarty, Director of Insight and Engagement at IWFM, and it is my job today to host this webinar to nurture the conversation between our panelists, and also today share some data with you that we recently gathered as part of a research project. What sits behind this webinar today is the pandemic. It has developed and evolved over a period of time, and we wanted to share with you some of the work that we've been doing to understand it and understand how that's been affecting workers and how their organisations have been supporting them. So just to give you a little flavour for what we'll have, so I'm going to take you through some data for the first 10-15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, and then I will be joined by an expert panel. I'm just going to ask my panel to turn their webcams on very briefly so they can all wave and say hello to you. So you should start seeing some faces. There we go, and Anthony should just appear in a second. There he is. So there they are. They're all sitting there waiting, but I've given them the luxury of being able to turn their webcam off whilst I'm taking you through the data, so they don't have to hold a pose for a long time. So I wanted to first talk to you about workforce attitudes to remote working. So as I said, the pandemic has developed over time, and we wanted to understand how UK employees are responding to that, what benefits and challenges they're facing, but we've done it in two phases. So let me talk you through how we've gathered this data. Well, the first thing when we looked at it that we wanted to do was to not fall into the trap of looking at ourselves within an echo chamber. We wanted to get outside of our professional community and look beyond that. And actually, one of our panelists today, Anthony Slumbers, who spoke at our conference last year, one of his phrases was one of the sort of central motivations for that when he talks about businesses don't want an office, they want a productive workforce. What it says to us is that we need to get under the skin of the workforce. That's the place where the real insight is. That's the place where we're going to find out exactly how we as a professional community need to respond. And if you look at some of the definitions of facilities management from academia over the past few decades, one of them that stood out for us again that follows that theme is this is Tay and U in 2001. They said that FM is the integrated management of the workplace to enhance the performance of the organisation. Well, the workplace element of that is fairly straightforward in terms of, we know what we're talking about here. But when we talk about the performance of the organisation, what we probably mean is the performance of the workforce of the organisation. So we've really got to understand how we best support people, and given the circumstances we're in at the moment, that's become more difficult, but also more important. Because what we've done and what we've experienced during this time is a decoupling of the idea of work as a destination and work as a thing that you do. Now, it's probably one of the most used conference slides in workplace and facilities conferences, where people talk about, work's not a thing, a place you go, it's a thing you do. And that's, of course, that's what we all believe. But actually, what this period of time has done is actually forced the issue, because frankly, we can't get into the buildings. So there's been a forcible decoupling of where we do our work and as organisations see it, where that work usually takes place. And that's what we wanted to explore, because there is a massive challenge. This is a stat. It actually comes from the ONS figures around home working, which you can find online. Is that when the lockdown started, when Boris Johnson, I think it was 23rd of March, wasn't it, where he came out and said, right, everyone, if you can work from home, do so, and lots of the public spaces that we're very used to going to were locked down. 70% of workers, which equates to about 23.9 million people, who had zero experience of working from home prior to these measures, were now working from home en masse. So the enormity of that shift shouldn't be underestimated. And that in itself presents a challenge, and it did present a challenge, particularly in those first few weeks, for organisations, particularly if they hadn't in the past invested in technology to support that, or policies that allowed that. So that's kind of the motivation behind this study. We wanted to ask employees from a range of people across the UK. So this isn't in one single organisation. What were they struggling with? What works well for them? How well has their organisation supported them? What has worked from home working? How might this change your approach in the future? And what are your feelings towards going back to the office? So we partnered with YouGov for this to attach our questions to the Omnibus survey, and we did it in 2 waves. So the first survey was done across the 22nd and 23rd of April, and I've just included some of the headlines that were present right on those days, where you can see we were right in the midst of the pandemic. Some of the challenges with the pandemic were coming out around PPE. There was things around the lack of services for some other health areas. So they were right in the thick of the pandemic. And then we did it again on the 18th and the 19th of June. And you can see there from some of the headlines about getting children back, it was as the measures and the social distancing measures were starting to ease and people were going back to some form of normal. And of course, one of the areas that people were going back to was, and part of the discussion, were workplaces. So just to give you an idea of the numbers, so each of these surveys went out to different communities of people, you know, a cross section of the UK community. All of them UK workers. We isolated those UK workers who had previously worked in an office and then now were working from home. So that gives us the number of people. So from April, we've got 398 people who met all of those conditions. UK worker had worked in an office, was now working at home, and it was 296 people in June who are in the same situation. So all in all, just short of 1,000 UK workers, of which just short of 700 of them are now working from home, and that's where we'll be drawing the data from. So first off, and you know, I do apologise, I've got a little bit of time to do this, and there's a lot of data in there. I will talk later on about where you can get access to some more stuff and stuff we're publishing in the future. But what have been the challenges? So I don't think there's any great surprises in here. What we've done is shown you in the teal the April results, and in the magenta the June results. Staying motivated and focused is the number one. You know, more than half of the respondents said that was a real problem. That links to the next one, which is distractions. Third was an inappropriate working environment. I will touch on that in more detail because that was a really interesting area of the research for us in the role that a working environment has. Switching off at the end of the day, taking enough breaks and maintaining the structure we're in there, staying active, because I think people are finding that they're sitting for long periods of time, whereas actually maybe in the office, going to get a cup of tea, you know, walking out to get some lunch might be a bit more active. And a sense of isolation and loneliness. And again, we will touch on that a little bit later on when we look at the specifics on that. So all of those ones that I've talked about, more than a third of respondents recognise that these have been the challenges. And you can see there that there's 8 real big challenges in terms of working from home. Some of the other ones less so, you know, just short of a quarter. I think the other thing to note here as well is that the responses from April and June relatively consistent. There's a few that have gotten a bit more acute, so people saying actually structure's becoming increasingly important and taking the breaks, staying active. Maybe that's because they sort of they're settling in now, and maybe they realise that those are the challenges. But it's fairly consistent, which I think is an important note to make here. But what do people miss about the office? Well, there was 3 really standout things that people were missing, and the 2 others just shortly, just behind them. But face-to-face interactions, whether it's with colleagues, which was number 1, or collaboration through face-to-face meetings, that was number 3. There's 2 that are related here again: physical separation between work and home life, and a clear structure to the day, and then an appropriate working space. All the others seem to be sort of much smaller in terms of what people missed about the office. Interest, that social activities just starting to creep up. I think people are missing, it's linked to that face-to-face, starting to miss the team community and connection. Actually, just on the point on that as well, though, what I would say here is that there were 5 real big, out of a list of say 10, there was 5 real significant things that people were missing about the previous working environment. But then we asked people about what they're enjoying about that shouldn't be the office, that should be the home office. What people are enjoying about working from home. And number 1 was not having to spend time commuting. saving money on that travel to and from the office. So those two things are connected. Not wearing formal clothes. This is the first time I've worn a shirt for a while. I've made a special effort for you people at home, but it's quite nice to actually stick a shirt on for the first time for a while. Doing more personal activities, more flexibility to juggle home and work life, more time to spend with the family, fewer unnecessary meetings, and being able to exercise more, fewer distractions. Now, what I would say here is that previously we only had 5 things that people were missing, that a third of people were missing from the office. But you can see here there is lots of things that people are enjoying about working from home. Now, there might be a novelty factor in here. But what's also, I think, really interesting is there is a great number of these benefits that are getting a stronger response than they did in April. And I wonder whether that's people starting to realize the benefits, particularly more time to spend with the family, which has seen a big jump from somewhere around 35% right up to 50%. So how has your organization done through this period? Well, the majority felt that they were their employer was able to help them work from home for an extended period of time. So that's good news. Nearly 80% feel the employer supported them during this period. Same number again almost felt that they were able to work from home for a significant period of time. 75% feel that they can do their work effectively from home, and 64% feel their employers invested in enabling them to do that, which is probably reflective of the previous statement. So by and large, I would say that what the data is showing is that the working from home experiment, as people are dubbing it, broadly speaking, organizations were able to mobilize it quite quickly. It has presented some challenges. There are a few things that we miss from the office, but actually, by and large, what this period has shown people is that there's some real benefits from working from home, you know, that's something we're going to have to bear in mind for the future. So how does that all come together and form people's attitudes in terms of going back to the office? Well, by and large, and this is the April data, we will show you what the June data looks like shortly. By and large, people are looking forward to getting back to the office. Nearly 50% of people said that they were. However, we do need to recognise 20% of people are saying that actually they're quite nervous about going back and not looking forward to it. And then you've got your general neutral folk. There's some people that don't know, yeah, it's still to be convinced either way. What is it that they're worried about in terms of coming back? Mainly it's the social distancing and being able to maintain that. You know, it's been drummed into us throughout this whole period about the importance of the 2 meters, which has now been adjusted slightly, although there's been, I'm not sure it's the clearest of messages, this 1 meter plus, but you know, social distancing has been drummed into us, and people are starting to wonder how that can possibly be managed in the working environment. I guess particularly if you're in very vertical working environments where, you know, elevators and escalators are very crucial to get you around a building. 44% are worried about hygiene and other cleaning standards. Now, some might think that's a surprise in terms of the order of things. Maybe hygiene and cleanliness would have been slightly higher up, but those are the 2 main ones. And one thing that I've included on this slide, because I think it's interesting and something to come back to in the future, 34% of people are worried about getting used to a corporate office culture again, getting back into the office in a way of working. And I'm sure Perry, when we get to the Q&A, will have some views on that. But this is the big stat from that first wave, and some of the results that we released then is that 55% of people agreed that this period has encouraged them to work from home more often. Now, we will talk, I do want to quiz the panel about the somewhat binary nature of the discussion around working from home, working from the office. But what this is showing us is that half of the respondents have said that they are starting to think about how they can do more work from home in the future. And I think that's something that's going to be really important in the coming months and years as organizations stabilize themselves in future work. Now, I wanted to just briefly, in the first set of questions, we did ask people about their work settings. It's not something we came back to in June, but we did ask people, what is your work setting? And you can see there from the middle that the vast majority have got a dedicated space set up for work. So they're doing it on, and we gave the example of a dining room table. So it's a space that they can get set up and geared up for work. Either side of that, we have what we kind of term the 2 extremes of a workplace environment, where about 15% of people are working from a sofa or an armchair or from a bed. And then about 25% of people have a dedicated home office, like the one I'm sat in now, a space, a room, a door that they can shut. There are some people that are working in multiple spaces. And actually, if you dig underneath the data, a lot of those people are people that are homeschooling, and they're just, they've got a lot of stuff going on in the house, and they're just trying to find a quiet spot, I guess, to do a call here, a few emails there. So, that's quite a challenge. But we wanted to understand what impact that the work setting can have on some of the attitudes that we just spoke about. Now, we took out the dedicated workspace because, given the nature of the volume of people that selected that as an option, all their results kind of reflect the average. But we wanted to look at the extremes. So those with a home office, here's some of the things that we found. They're less likely to report missing the physical separation of work life. They're less likely to worry about a clear structure to the day, face-to-face chat with colleagues. So they're finding less challenges. And they're also less likely to report loneliness, distraction, poor equipment, motivation, structure, and staying active. So, we can already see that the home office environment actually overcomes some of those challenges that we previously saw. They are also much more likely to report that they want to work from home more in the future. So remember that 55% number. These guys, 17 percentage points above that. So we're getting up into the sort of more than 3/4 of people have said, actually, I'm going to be working from home more often. They feel more comfortable working in this setting for an extended period of time. They're more likely to report concern with going back to the office, and they're more likely to agree they're going to work from home more often. I've already said that there. So we can see that the home office actually overcomes a lot of those challenges and diminishes that desire to get back to the office and increase that concern about going back. Whereas those on the sofa are more likely to cite a problem with work-life separation. They're more likely to miss the face-to-face chats and their own working space. They're much more likely to report challenges with distractions, with poor equipment, with motivation, more likely to report loneliness. I think that's really interesting given the well-being debate. And a third of them, compared to 20% previous in generally across the average, a third of them are reporting that they are doing fewer hours than they would have previously. So I think that's obviously something that organisations need to keep an eye on. They're also more likely to say that they felt less likely to agree that they're prepared to work for an extended period. They're able to work effectively. They want to work from home more often in the future. That drops by 20 points, and aren't interested in more flexible work programs. They're more likely to want support with mental health and to have virtual social activities, but they are much more likely to be looking forward to getting back into the office. So remember, that average is 50%. These guys, it is closer to 70% in terms of wanting to get back to the office, and it's almost the exact polar opposite of those home working. And what is interesting as well is when you look at who are these people that have home offices versus those people that don't, and what we're seeing here is that by and large, those on sofas are 18 to 24-year-olds, and the home office is actually more of a spread through some of those later age groups. Now, it's difficult to tell exactly why that is, but you can draw some proxies to say that these are people early career, 18 to 24s, early career, junior roles potentially, but they're more likely, I guess, to be working from home or in shared accommodation. So it's very difficult for them to carve out their own space and to get some concentrated work done. But what we're seeing here is particularly the 35 to 44-year-olds or the 55 plus, they're likely to have a spare room. They've got a bit of space. The kids might either be too small or have flown the nest. So there's certainly some social elements of that, I think, that are really interesting. But I do think it's something that organisations need to consider when they're bringing people back into the office. And they might have to make some choices about who. It's actually what groups of people are we bringing back in, and that's something I'll be putting to the panel in the Q&A. So fast jump into some of the June data. So we've looked at some of the comparisons here. Now I've kind of wrestled with this idea of return to work, return to the office, return to the workplace, return to normal. Who knows what we're actually returning to? I did talk to one organisation who said that they didn't want to call it the return to work plan, because guess what? People have been working all the way through this. Actually, if you want to get very technical, it's return to the corporately managed space. But what does that return to some form of normality look like? Well, when we asked in June about how much you're looking forward to going to the office, we saw a dramatic drop. I'm looking forward to it drop. That agreement statement dropped by 15%, and almost identically, it shifted not to a neutral position, but to people say, I am actually not looking forward to it. So we wonder whether that's coupled with this idea of starting to realize some of the benefits. Having done this for a few months now, it's actually changing your attitudes towards the return, having previously maybe felt that actually the default was to go to the office, but now you're realizing actually I can do some stuff from home. And in terms of the organizational activity through this, I wanted to look at what tactics have helped with that position. So you see these pie charts on the right hand side. The teal color are those looking forward to the office. The magenta will be those that aren't looking forward to the office, and then you've got the gray neutrals. Now we can see here that regular communications has been the #1 tactic. Respondents were able to choose one or more of these, so that there might be people that have selected several of these, and encourage employee involvement in plans. But we can see that it doesn't really affect the average. It's about a third of people that look forward to it, a third that aren't looking forward to it, and a third that are neutral. Interestingly, sharing the company risk assessment seems to have an adverse effect and encourages more people to agree that they're not looking forward to going back to it. Equally, and I guess this is kind of confusing. People, it's almost a negative, this one. They don't feel that they've been communicated enough with or involved enough, although there has been some of it, but they are much more likely to be looking forward to coming back into the office. It does make you wonder whether ignorance is bliss in this sense. So what can organizations do moving forward? Well, a lot of people said that they're looking for more flexible remote working options. They want to work from home part-time more often and do a bit of a mix. When they're in the office, they do want to see increased cleaning provisions. I think again, this is a kind of security thing. This is going to be a reassurance thing. They want regular communication, an adjusted desk organisation to help maintain social distancing. Remembering that was one of the principal challenges that they saw. So those four seem to be the main things that organisations are going to have to start thinking about when they start looking forward over the next few weeks. However, habit changing. This is a stat from April 2020. 55% of people agreed that this period is encouraging to work from home more often. Well, actually in June that went up to 61%. So increasingly people are starting to say, actually, I do want to work from home more often. But this one for me really stuck out, and a list of several agreement statements that we put forward. This one slightly provocative, but we said, do you think that this period of home working has made the office seem unnecessary? And 51% of people agreed. Now, we can all have our opinions on whether that's right or wrong. The reality is there is a sentiment developing that we need to be mindful of. So conclusions, I've gone through these very quickly, and they will be available in the next few months. We're working with our research team to bring together a fuller report on this. But some conclusions, I put the question mark here because this is simply my take on some of those data, and use the question panel on your webinar control panel to put some questions to us about what you've seen here. But what I kind of take from that is that there's the challenges that we identified in April have actually remained fairly consistent throughout the lockdown. So there's not been anything that's maybe gotten more trickier, or things that we've kind of got on top of and therefore feel a bit more comfortable with. So they've remained fairly consistent. There have been some changes in what we miss, and principally that's been the team. And I think that's great news. I think, in terms of wanting to create that social cohesion, wanting to create that sense of community, people are starting to miss their colleagues. And also what we've gained in terms of benefits: time with the family, more flexibility, being a bit more in control of our work-life balance. Work settings available at home do have an impact on these challenges and subsequent desire to get back into the office. And I do think that's something that organisations need to be mindful of. Over the period of lockdown, though, appetite for getting back into the offices has diminished. Okay, so we are finding people becoming more comfortable, and their attitude towards getting back to the office has weakened. And actually, oversharing and being, very kind of, sort of clear on the risks and how you're addressing those risks actually might have an adverse effect on that appetite, because it might feel that there's more to worry about if there's a lot made of it. Now, that's a really tricky one, and I'll ask the Q&A panel about that. But the big thing is more home working is firmly on the agenda, and that is something that we as workplace and facilities professionals are going to have to start exploring and discussing with our teams and with our organizations, because it does look like it's a mainstay. And finally, and this is something that I've been exploring in some of the other work I've been doing, the office could be facing a value proposition problem. You know, people are starting to question, well, if I'm able to do all this work from home, then what is the point of the office? And I guess it would be really interesting to combine that with data that looks at the quality of the office, because maybe we see that some of the very good offices and people are willing to go back, but actually some of those offices that haven't been looked after, that haven't been developed, that haven't been managed, are the ones where they're finding it difficult to bring people back into that shared community space. So there you go. So that's the data that we've gone through. We've now got a chance to go through some questions. I'm just going to fire up the questions here so I can have a look at that. So feel free to continue to use those. Use that function to quiz the panel. I've got some questions I want to ask the panel as well. At this point, I'm going to ask them to turn their webcams back on, and hopefully you'll start seeing their lovely faces appearing again. Here we are. Hello, guys. Let me just get your faces on there so I can see you as well. So first things first, I guess, and Anthony, given you, we just got a sound check from you there on your microphone. Let's ask you first, was there anything in that data that I rattled through? Is there anything in there that surprised you or caught your attention in particular?
Well, actually, right at the start, I was amazed that 70% of workers had zero experience of working from home, which actually just sort of reinforces that it's been quite extraordinary how well people have adapted to working at home. Because if you've got 70% of people no experience, you think, well, most of those companies were not set up in order to enable them to have people from working from home. So I think it's actually a testament to the fact that, funnily enough, we do have the technology, we do have the tools, we do have the capabilities to work wherever we want. And I think there's this fundamental breaking of the link between the managerial of attitude of presenteeism, and you can't work from home because you're going to slack, and unless I can see you, which has been in place for decades, has so completely been broken. And this has forced this, if you can take people from 70% never working from home to working at home 5 days a week in like no time at all, it's actually quite extraordinary.
And then we get a few nods there from Bridget and Perry. Bridget, I know that this was something that you were talking about when we were having sort of our preamble chat yesterday, in terms of organisations and their readiness to work from home. It's always been a challenge because it's there's barriers and there's excuses, I guess, in some instances from organisations not to really let this thing happen. So have you got anything to add to Anthony's point there? And also, was there anything in particular in the data that you thought stood out and was interesting?
Thanks, Chris. Turn my mute off. Yeah, you're right. I've spent a lot of time working with organisations, mainly in the public sector, trying to encourage flexible and smart working. And the big barrier has always been this issue about getting people to work from home. I mean, there's always been people who wanted to, but there's been a lot of nervousness around it, and particularly, from managers who are concerned about what would happen if they let the people work from home, that sort of thing. And also the technology, and this experience has really shown us that that those barriers are generally no longer there. Everybody's had to try it. Almost everybody has found that it works, and the technology, I mean, it's a good job it was now and not a few years ago, because the technology actually really has stood up very, very well. And a lot of organisations have already had that technology in place because they've been moving in this direction. And incredibly, it stood up well, and people have learned the skills. And so those excuses, if you like, or those worries are no longer there. And so for those of us thinking about what happens next about smart working, where this goes, we've got to readjust our minds as well, because everything we were talking about, that particular set of barriers, kind of isn't there. It's another range of concerns, and things that we can talk about later. But as far as something that surprised me. I was a bit surprised actually by the only 55% and then later 61% people agreed that this would encourage them to do more home working. I mean, I'm surprised it's as low as that, actually, you know, given the good things that you were talking about, how the advantages that people have seen about working from home. I would have thought a larger proportion of people would have said that they wanted to do more of it.
Yeah, I guess that's where some of these nuances with what working from home looks like, right? You know, if it's a nightmare, then you probably can't wait to get back into the office. Perry, you're our HR voice in this, and I just realised as well I didn't give you guys an opportunity to tell us who you are, where you come from, what's your name, where do you come from. We'll do that in a second. But just Perry, you are our HR voice in this scenario. So, from an HR point of view, did anything stick out? Because we had a couple of bits about, you know, desire for flexible working and all the rest of it, which is obviously a big HR debate as well. But was there anything in there that you think was particularly interesting from an HR point of view?
I'll play the rather predictable HR professional card then. And you talked about a third were worried about culture, but that actually says to me that 2/3 aren't. And I think I've seen a lot of people say, oh yeah, but what about the spirit of the team? And what about all this stuff that we miss in the face-to-face proximity sense? There are 2/3 of people saying, actually, do you know what? You can still replicate, recreate and forge ahead on a cultural basis. You don't have to be in the same shared space to do that. So I'm quite heartened by that. I'm sort of surprised because I thought more people would romanticize the coming together, creating the culture. But actually, I think what people are saying is we're all in this together. We've joined in a different way. You've seen the explosion of sort of social Zooms and all that kind of thing, you know, so people are trying to still create the kind of cultural fabric of connectedness, but just not in the same proximity. So I'm pleasantly surprised that 2/3 of people aren't worried that this is having a cultural detriment.
Good, right, and to fulfill my promise of giving you guys just a little bit of a moment to tell us who you are, where you're coming from. Anthony, if you could just start us off there, just give us a bit of background on your world, what you're looking at. Also, just let us know what lockdowns look like for you and work from home, because I do know you're in rather swanky home. You're in our home office demographic, aren't you?
Yeah. Okay, well, I've actually run software companies for 20 odd years, involved in writing software for managing commercial real estate, so mainly offices. So I've actually worked remotely for a very long time, and I'm actually sitting in my office at the end of the garden, and I'm used to working with teams all around the world. So a lot of this is not so much of a shock to me. Nowadays, I've actually moved on from all my companies, and I split my time now between writing, speaking, and advising. So this is definitely a bug in terms of the speaking at conferences side of my business, but the advising is going on. I work with everyone from small startups to big institutional investors, mainly looking at what is the impact of technology on the demand and therefore the supply of real estate.
Lovely. And Bridget, do you want to give us a brief overview of the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yes, I have been advising on and actually working and advocating flexible and remote working, including home working, for at least 20 years in government, and latterly as an independent consultant, but working in the same sphere and largely with the public sector. So actually working, I see this as a wonderful sort of leap forward in everything that I've sort of lived and worked and tried to get changed for a large portion of my career. And I started working flexibly with laptop back in the 1990s, when I first had children and was commuting to London once a fortnight, you know, to work in an office, and the rest of the time I was working from home. So it's something I'm very familiar with, and I work at home most of the time. So things haven't actually changed very much for me personally. I don't have a room, but I have a dedicated space for my office in a room, which is fine. But the things that I've found that I've missed in being entirely at home it's the informality, the ability to sort of drop in. on people. Every meeting, even the social ones, has to be arranged pretty well. You know, there's a formality around it which you just don't get when you happen to serendipitously come across somebody and have a chat or a coffee. And the energy and stimulation of other people about, you know, that kind of buzziness that you get when you're in a room together, and it's really hard to get that same kind of intensity of creativity when you're working online, even with the good facilities that we've got through the technology. So, you know, those are the things that I've personally sort of really missed about being so completely technology focused, even though it's very familiar to me.
And again,
I
that's
run
something
the
that came
changing work company, by the way. So I have my own company now. I was a civil servant in the past, but now I've got a consultancy company.
So your point there about the informality, kind of that's coming out in the data, isn't it? People are saying, actually, the things I miss most about the office is not the office, it's the people in it. And I think that's a really interesting message for us as a community. Perry, you and I have known each other for a number of years, having worked together 2014 on the Workplace Conversation. So I was very pleased that we could get you to join us here from an HR perspective. But just give us a bit of an overview of the work that you do and some of your takes on the lockdown as it's been for yourself.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, like Bridget, I worked in the civil service and I worked remotely from about the mid to late 90s. So yeah, so I've been used with inferior technology, but not having a place of work has been something I've been fine with for 20 years. And over the last sort of couple of years, I'm running a consultancy now. It's pretty small, but we're across 4 time zones. So by nature, we're dispersed. So when we sort of issued the edict that, you know, we should go into lockdown, it was really just to say we're not going to travel to any clients, we're not going to travel to any conferences, we're just going to do everything we would normally do but from home. So I've dabbled in things like co-working spaces, I've dabbled in being on site with clients, and so after the lockdown all the work collapsed and then you have to work really hard to get it back again when people sort of think, hang on a minute, we can still do this work but just do it differently. So yeah, so things have picked up. So I'm consulting with some clients at the moment, and they've got major change programs and they're all being run virtually. So you know, we are busting the myth that you need to be in a room in order to, you know, convene a project board or make some decisions, because you just don't. So yeah, so I think it has forced us to start thinking differently. Like Bridget, the whole serendipitous energy that you get from being around other people is something that you really do notice. So I can relate to those people who are reporting that sense of isolation. But as a team, we've worked really hard at how well we engage. We're on Slack, we have a daily check-in, we tell each other how we feel, we tell people what we're up to, we share some cool stuff, and it's literally like you would be sat across the way from them. You're just not talking to them, you're just messaging them. So we've compensated, and actually our culture has gotten stronger. We've got more supportive, we've got more considered, and we're more open about how we feel. Now, I like that. From an HR perspective, you'd say I would do, because it's touchy-feely, but it isn't. It's about how emotionally are we about the work we're doing, and we've made some really good strides in doing that. So yeah, so I've coped. I've got a lot of experience under my belt, and I'm seeing my profession in a different light now in how they've reacted with furloughing and with instant lockdown. They've been putting in some super long shifts. They've been the CEO's best friend saying, what on earth do I do, because I've got some people who need to shield, how do I deal with that? So I see them tired, but I see them have stepped up to that sort of particular influential position. So I'm quite pleased about how my profession has reacted in the large around things like the lockdown.
That's an interesting point, actually. If we just sort of hang on there, because there were 2 things that, as you were talking there, that struck me. There's this idea of culture, and I suppose if I'm playing devil's advocate in as someone who's watching this, they might be saying, well, we're talking to 3 people here that have their own organizations or sort of small organizations, and therefore these things where I've got 5,000 people in the building and I need to try and work out how we maintain that sense of culture and all the rest of it. So it'd be interesting to understand how involved HR have become in this dispersed cultural element, or have they, like many professions have done, forget that stuff, that's the cherry on top stuff. What we just need to do right now, get the furlough stuff going, because no one knows what a furlough was until Boris said it on a press briefing, everyone flicking through dictionary.com to find out what a furlough was. And you know, the cultural aspect, which did come out in the survey and the results, you know, for me it poses a question about what culture is and what it isn't. You know, is there this kind of this conference version of culture where we like to wrap it up in a neat bow and say, you know, this is how you do culture, and also how the workplaces roll in that culture, because what you're talking about there is actually the culture can still be supported through a dispersed workforce. So I know there's a lot of packed in there, but you're nodding, which makes me feel like you're seeing where I'm coming from on it. But how do you think the HR work profession has kind of navigated some of that, and how do you think it will influence some of our colleagues over in facilities?
So I think you're right. Going back to your early point about the safety concerns, that was absolutely paramount to everybody. And so that's where it went. And then I think quite quickly, though, it turned into things like, but how well are people and how connected can we make them to their work so that they still feel like they're being productive, that they are actually keeping our business afloat? And then how do we connect them with people who are furloughed? And how do we connect people who have the luxury, if you want to call it that, of working from home, no matter what the circumstance, but people who have to keep moving while we're all sat still? So I think actually HR has, without necessarily having a game plan, had to navigate that triangulation, keep in touch with people, connect them still to what the company is all about. So I was really pleased that in this response that you've got, lots of the communication activities came out pretty high. That tells me that the internal comms function and HR and leaders have been doing their most to keep people engaged and keep them informed. But I think we are starting to sort of unravel the ball of wool that is culture. I guess a couple of points I'll make there is I think we over amplify the company culture, because I think the subculture that sits very closely around you and your team is the more powerful determinant of what you think culture is. A company will say our culture is entrepreneurialism, but if you're working in a subculture which is highly regulated, you are working in a highly regulated culture no matter what the rest of the company says it wants you to do. So I think we need to still be thinking in HR terms about the near culture, not just the bigger culture. That I think you can still start to pay attention to in dispersed nature by keeping those teams really closely connected and really strongly aligned and in constant communication. I've got another good example for you here from a dairy farm where people were still turning up to obviously get the cows into the milking side of things, but all the accountants and the commercial side of things were all dispersed. And actually there was a real sense of how do I keep these two disparate groups of people connected? And they started to think about whether they could form them into almost verticals rather than, horizontals rather than verticals. So they could say, well, you genuinely support the northern team, so why don't we connect you to the people who are working in the northern dairies more, so you can communicate and create a stronger bond, probably stronger than you would have done if you were still turning up to the office. Now, I like that kind of dialogue. It's trying to create a different connection without dismantling the structure. So I think we're seeing the early signs of response to that, Chris, is where I'd leave it.
And that's an interesting point there, because what you're getting into is this kind of fluid organization and people going, well, actually, now that the concrete box is kind of, we've removed that now, there's a bit of an albatross around our neck. Actually, we can think about this a bit more with a bit more fluidity. And Anthony, I wonder whether you've got some views on that, because I know that you've been very vocal during this period about the risk or the worry that the community that might benefit from having concrete boxes and might make money from having concrete boxes. There's this kind of idea that let's get us back to where we are, and actually we could be missing out on some of those opportunities that Perry's talked about because of a kind of a return to old world view, as opposed to going, actually, if we were to start again, how would we do this now that a constraint or a preconception of what we do to get together to work, what that might look like. I want if those that follow you on Twitter will know that you've been very vocal on that sort of stuff.
I think we are definitely going to be going back to a different world, and we should be saying hallelujah for that, because clearly everything is going to be different. It's certainly going to be different for some considerable time. I mean, there's always the point to be made that not only are we everyone working from home, we're working from home in the middle of a pandemic, which does actually have implications. I mean, the thing I miss most is the fact that I haven't been anywhere else apart from here for months and months, and it's very nice here. But I like going to other places, and I like stimulation from different people in different places and all that. That's the bit I miss. But I think one of the really interesting things here, which follows on from what Perry said, is this idea about communication. In the tech industry, there's been quite a number of companies that have been working distributed for a long time. So forget the work from home thing. The point is you're not in a central office, so you're somewhere other than in an HQ with everyone else. And one of the keys to building distributed companies is communication. You actually communicate a great deal more than you do actually when you're in the office, because you have to. You over communicate, you over explain, you over emphasize the purpose and the projects and the team and all this sort of stuff. And it's interesting, I was talking to someone recently who said, well, I always used to think that I was a really good mentor in the office. And then since being out of the office, I realized I've actually a terrible mentor in the office. It's always been like, well, Valentina was in the office, so I'm mentoring people. But she said, I never really mentored anyone. I was just there. And it was like they're supposed to learn it all from osmosis. But since we've been home, I've been incredibly conscious that I need to speak to this person and that person and that person. And I'm speaking to people for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes in a way that I never did before. So there are so many things I think we can learn from what is good being in the office and what is not good being in offices. It's quite clear what we miss from offices, and the things that offices are good at is obviously it's the socializing, it's the working with my team or my customers, it's learning within the workplace, and it's culture and attitude and all that sort of thing. Well, why don't we make offices that are dedicated to that? This is the point about I don't want an office, I want a productive workforce. What can I do in an office that I can't do here? Well, I can't sit with my team, I can't learn together, I can't imbue a culture. So I'm going to go to the office to do that. And I'd really like us to rethink from, if you like, from first principles, who needs to do what where. And this is going to be different for individual companies, and it's going to be different for individual people within a company. What are the jobs to be done of each individual, and what's the best space to do it? And sometimes that's going to be at home, sometimes that's going to be in a WeWork, sometimes that's going to be in a coffee shop, sometimes that'd be a library, and sometimes it'd be in the office. And why don't we work out the way our businesses use real estate, to use the right real estate, the most appropriate real estate for the purpose that we've got to do. And if we do that, I mean, obviously there's lots of constraints. Some people will be locked into long leases, but actually most people are not locked into very long leases. So the immediate thing to be doing should be to be thinking about who needs this space and for what purpose, who needs what space for what purpose, and let's see how we can work that out. And then the whole dynamic of the industry will be reframed around, well, demand might be changing, but actually, I don't really care. Even as a landlord, I don't care if my occupier takes less space, because I'm going to give them better space, and actually they're going to pay more for that better space because it's more aligned with what enables them to be productive. So there are a million upsides, as long as we make sure we do take the opportunity and don't just go back. So one of the questions, wasn't it, the fear of retreating into the old corporate culture. Yeah. And that's like saying, no, please don't do that to me again. And you can feel it from employers. Employees don't want this. Employees want better culture, better space, better working conditions and everything, and we should give it to them.
And Bridget, we're talking about smart working here, right? You know, Anthony talking there about this kind of choice-centered, sort of holistic look at work is the central feature, and we build the settings around. But you've been talking about this for a long time. You know, some of the early publications from the Cabinet Office advocating smart working. Could you just for the benefit of the people on the webinar, just give us a sort of brief overview of the smart working? And I know there's a standard that's built around that as well, just so people understand that it's not just a flippant kind of phrase to describe something. There is a lot of structure to it. But also, you know, listening to Anthony, do you think that this is smart working's moment, or is there still a fear, a worry that actually we might bounce back over it again as in a kind of an unimaginative return to, oh, thank God the office is open again, everyone get back to as you were sort of thing?
Yeah, no, Yes, I think in that latter there is a danger of that happening. But just to give an overview of smart working, or smarter working as it's sometimes talked about, there is a standard, a British standard code of practice that gives guidance as to what is meant by smart working, and there are a set of principles within that which were actually developed originally within the Cabinet Office for government, but have been extended into this code of practice for everyone. And there are 10 of those. I won't sort of run through them all, but one of the fundamental ones is that work should take place in the most appropriate time at the most appropriate place for the task, bearing in mind the task itself, the circumstance of the individual, the business need. So it is about choices, but it's about constrained choices. It assumes that people will be mobile, that they will be able to be mobile as necessary. The technology is not a constraint, that they will work in an environment where they are allowed to make choices, and where their performance is judged on the output, on the result of their work, not by being in a physical place where they don't have to be for the work, but just because that's somehow a requirement of someone's whim, essentially, that it's not an essential for the task. So you have to be very clear about those sorts of constraints, because some jobs do require someone to be in a particular place at a particular time, and that's not against smart working. A lot of people say, well, that's not smart working. Well, it is. It's just that you have to understand the constraints. And at the moment, under the post-COVID situation, there's an awful lot of restraints and constraints about where people can be. And so again, people would say, oh, well, it's not smart working, but it is. It's working within a framework where you understand, as Anthony said, you understand what's required for the job and how that is balanced with the individual preference, but also the needs of the business itself. And again, that's often kind of overlooked when you go into trying to give people choices, which is what we've been wanting to do, is to empower people to make choices about where and when they work best. Sometimes it goes a little away from what's the requirements of the job again. So it's awfully difficult to balance these things. And work that I've been doing over the last few years has been around, as Perry said, very much team-based sort of training and supporting change makers, leaders in teams, as to how they can help their teams balance those things and develop a way of working together that allows choice and responsibility. So I absolutely agree with Perry's view about the team base, that there are these principles, but when you actually enact them in reality, you've got to look at what people actually do and how they actually need to work together, and be very clear about whether the constraints are artificial or real, about time and place, and how far people's personal preferences are getting in the way of the kind of way they can work best with other people, because people will need to make compromises around their personal freedoms for other people. I mean, that's what work is about. So it's very much, this is smart working's moment, because the barriers we were talking about have largely gone. But I see that a lot of the conversation is about going back to the old ways and talking to the people, as I have done with a couple of clients over the last 4 months now. They're pretty clear. They're people working in the teams. They're the people connected, and they're clear about the kind of things they want to keep, which is a lot to do with inclusion and being on a level playing field, and lack of hierarchy, and managers making an effort to keep in touch with people. A lot of these things to do with people issues, and the culture issues, rather than so much about the place and technology. And they want to hang on to those and take them forward, and they're afraid that creating a binary system again, where there's people in the office and people at home and kind of nothing in between, will just go back to the old kind of problems that you had, where the people in the office were the ones who were in on things, and the ones who were remote were kind of left out. And yet the office is just another remote location, particularly when most people are actually working at home still. You just have to treat it as another remote location, I think.
I've seen that kind of idea talked about a few times, which is, there's this kind of hub and spoke idea that permeates, which is our corporate building is the center of the universe and everything's remote, but your idea that, you know, that actually it's just another location, it's on a level playing field with everything else. And to Anthony's point, actually the role of that corporate space is to fulfill some of the bits you can't do elsewhere. Anthony, I'm going to come to you in a second because I want to explore some of the financial elements of this, the market response to this, because they could well be. But Perry, it's come up a few times about the cultural elements, and a lot of the questions are sort of saying, the kind of sense I'm getting from questions that all gravitate around a similar thing, which is we can be quite imaginative as a community. We can sit there, and to Anthony's point, we can think about shared space, we can think about co-working, home working, restaurant working, whatever. We can be quite creative. However, our leadership needs to buy into that. Our workforce needs to buy into that. We need to break down some of those those really tricky, narky kind of elements of culture, which is this. It always makes me think of Dave Copland's Future of Work video that he did all those years ago, where he talked about you know, everyone wondering how your patio's getting on because you're working from home. And to Bridget's point, that we're in danger of, if we go into this I read an article in Wired this morning, if you go into this hybrid model where you say actually some people are in the office, some people are at home, some people we don't know where the other people are, you know, everyone's just doing what they're doing, will you get some of those old challenges that you have, which is the power? And this Wired article was really interesting. It said the power resides in that corporate space. So do you miss out on promotion opportunities? Do you miss out on, you know, actually fulfillment, because you miss out on conversations happen, and because they're not all an email, you don't even know they've happened. So how do you see the HR community probably, you know, buddying up, and this goes right back to what you and I were doing in 2014, buddying up with HR to go, we need to work really, really closely together on this to somehow come up with a mix of settings, but a culture and a way of working and a mindset that allows us to straddle all those bits without anything sort of falling off.
So I think the persuasive argument for those in the more powerful positions is still going to be one about performance and about value creation and that sort of thing. So that there is a good opportunity, I think, to start thinking about the lenses we look through that we talk about for value. So I guess if we are saying, what's the value of keeping everybody safe? I mean, it's very difficult to put a financial value on that, but you've still got the undying commitment of your team now, who have weathered storms, who have adapted and shown that flexibility we heard you talk about, because you started from a point of looking after you. Now, that might be a shock to some leaders, that actually when they show that they look after their people, they get a massively productive response from them. So I think we need to think about the correlation between duty of care and responding to need and high performance. If we do that, I think we can open up a different, richer conversation about what we then do to create the right dynamic for where people work, how they work, and try and keep that sort of balanced equation going. But I think we've got to think about the hard numbers, because I can imagine every single business leader from whatever sector is now going to be thinking recession, decline in income, all those kind of things are going to be whirring in their heads now that they've gone through this safety and lockdown phase. So I think we need to talk to that. I think we need to talk about the economics of it. I think we need to talk about different forms of value, human value, social value. We've all seen the companies who have sinned by not looking after their people, and people are actively saying, I'm not going to buy from them at all. I'm not going to their places. And we've seen the saintly ones where people are saying, how do I support this company more? How do I, support my local grocer who went to a platform business overnight, and I don't need to then, sort of buy my goods from a particular sort of wish fulfillment center. So I think that's what we'll start to see. We'll see the economics come in, we'll see the ethics come in, and if we can box clever and run those together in parallel, I think we'll get the leaders going, that's a helpful way for me to plot at least the next quarter or maybe even the next reporting year. And then we can get some latitude to make those decisions and involve people, create the flexibility, keep an eye on them, look after well-being. And I often say, Chris, that there's a pandemic right now, but we were already in a pandemic because the UK alone is losing about £15 billion worth of productivity through work-related stress. Now, what we've seen from your figures is that there's maybe a little cessation of that because people are able to balance their life a bit better. Those are the kind of calculations I'd love to see us put to the top team and get them to stare at that and go, right, now how do we mobilize to that?
I think what's interesting there is that you're kind of touching on the workforce almost since the lockdown, maybe they're starting to realise, some of that data showing that they're starting to realise that there are some benefits to that. Maybe they're feeling a bit more control, and that's going to have an impact on demand. One of the stats, I didn't include it, I'm just trying to look for the actual figure, but I couldn't find it. But one of the stats we looked at is that we're seeing that there's a chunk of the workforce saying that actually their desire to join an organisation or stay with an organisation could be shaped by how flexible and open-minded that organisation is to having a bit more flexibility. Now that's going to have an impact, is it, Anthony, on demand? Because there has been I remember right at the start of this, to Perry's point about we just lost Perry there, I think. Right. Oh, he's just about to come back. How exciting. With Perry's point about business leaders are going to start thinking actually the economics of this. Let's be frank, they're not. There are some leaders that might be thinking nice and holistically about human value and all the rest of it, but actually there are some, and it was the Barclays CEO got a lot of attention very early on when he said that actually this idea of having a 7,000 person tower in the middle of Canary Wharf doesn't really strike me as being that straightforward, given that we've managed to get work done in the interim. Albeit I did see one of the comments off the back of that was someone saying, how come he didn't mind when it was 50% empty in the first place? Because no one's there anyway. But Anthony, how do you see that demand changing? You touched on it a little bit when you're saying about these sort of different options, but the real estate community are going to have to adapt to that. They're going to have to come up with different products and services and ideas. What's your confidence in their ability, because it's quite an oil tanker of an industry, how quickly are they going to be able to adapt? Because even just co-working seemed to throw them into a bit of a tiz a few years ago. So how are they going to adapt to this?
I think the immediate answer is some really well and some really badly. But you actually just made a fundamental point there of someone pointing out, well, you didn't notice that your office is half empty anyway. The big dirty secret, the elephant in the room of offices, is that for roughly half of the people who go to an office every day, they do not think their office enables them to be productive, and half the time they're not there anyway. So the inefficiency within offices is extraordinary anyway. And I think a lot of the comments from the CEOs is that they've suddenly noticed. They've suddenly noticed, oh, well, funny enough, our business runs well, and then people are telling them, well, half of it was empty anyway. So the whole point is, from all sides, we've got to be thinking about creating better buildings with better workplaces, better suited for the needs of our customers, and we've got to use a lot more data. We've got to think a lot harder about real needs. And what I think is going to happen is it's all going to be across a continuum. There will be very few companies that go all remote, and there will be very few companies that go all in the office. I mean, you've got people like Alan Sugar saying, oh, I'll never trust anyone who's not in an office. Well, go and work for someone else. This is really bad out of date thinking. Most of it is going to be on a bell curve. People are going to want between 1, 2, and 3 days a week and out of the office, which clearly is going to impact demand. There's a lot in the industry who have their heads so deep in the sand that we can get people working 2 days a week from home, drop demand by 40%, but somehow we don't need less space. But the less space thing, as I was alluding to earlier, is not a problem for the good operators. Historically, in the real estate industry, everyone has gone up and down at the same time. They've all ridden the roller coaster of real estate at the same time. So they've all been geniuses in the top market, and they've all been idiots in a slumping market. What you're going to get a lot more of now is a differentiation between landlords and operators, or landlords working closely with operators, who can provide a space that is really well suited for your company and enables your company to be as productive as possible. And people will take that space and they will pay a premium for it. And then you will get companies that work on the same way of thinking that they have done for the next 20 years. And more of the customers will go, well, fine, but I don't want that anymore. Sorry, your product no longer has product market fit in any way. So you're going to get overall a lot of people losing a lot of money. And I think a lot of people within the real estate industry, a lot of people making a lot of money, it's going to be really difficult to stay still. You're either going to have to rework your product, your services to better cater for a wiser, more informed, more data-led customer, or and provide them with the service, and you will do well. And if you're not good at that, you're going to lose so much value so quickly. So my overall feeling is there's going to be a huge amount of change for the good operators, for the ones who've largely been thinking about this for quite a long time. They're going to do really well, and but against that, lots of people in real estate are going to lose a shed load of value.
And just another one, a question, a very specific question there, but it's quite an interesting one for me as well, Anthony, that location might change, right? Because I kind of, when you were talking there, it kind of made me think that the market conditions have changed, and there's an element of need that's been stripped away. This idea that I need to come into the city, that's where the talent's going to be. I need to have something that represents our brand. So almost like the real estate operators had a hold over the market. The power was on one side. Well, we've got that thing that you think you definitely need, in you come. Do you think? I guess what you're talking about is twofold. The organisation again. Turns out we don't. Yeah, who knew? But it turns out we don't need this so much now. So there's more of a deal to be done, and there's a bit more power that's gone to the occupier. Do you think?
To an extent, the attraction of central business districts in great cities is going to remain very, very strong. You know, right. The centre of London is fantastic. The centre of New York is fantastic. The centre of Paris is fantastic. Why do I want to go there? Because it's fantastic. So a lot of the best companies and the best talent will still want to be able to go to, frankly, the best places. That will be married, though, with the opportunity to go to other places. An awful lot of this depends on commute times. So I'm only 35 miles south of London, but it would take me an hour and a half to get to Liverpool Street, 3 hours a day. Why would I want to do that 5 days a week? 1 or 2 days, fantastic. 5 days a week, no. If I lived in Kensington, I wouldn't care. I'd go to an office every day. And the individual geographies of cities and towns is really important. How hard is it for people to get in? These places where people do a lot of commuting, so London primarily is what I always think of. Clearly, there's huge benefits for people to do less time in the centre of town, but the attraction of being in the centre of a great city is actually more than work, because that's where the museums are, that's where the theatres are, that's where everything else. So it's a balance, but it's, as I say, it's on the bell curve. It's not going to be one end or the other.
That's an interesting point, actually, and I want to come to Bridget about this. And I think, workplace professionals. Well, the general message I'm sort of hearing is that what this has done is lowered some perceptions. It's kind of got us to rethink stuff, and actually the solution looks more like a mix of like a workplace mix, as opposed to we have the workplace and then you do something at home and we don't worry about that, and our responsibility is going to have to stretch across it. But also something that Anthony mentioned there in terms of geography, because the government, the public sector and central government are in a program. They were right in the middle of this program of dispersing their working environments around the UK in these hubs. The hubs were designed for any civil servant to come in. I know sometimes whole departments kind of occupy sort of chunks of it. But do you think that kind of model, Bridget, might be something that we see more and more of, which is organisations saying, look, rather than having, so for me, I'm 20 miles outside of London. I'm out west of London. But I would much rather nip to Reading than I would to London from a commuting point of view. I'd love to go to London for the same reason Anthony's mentioned. It's great going in there and getting to a good pub and all the rest of it. But do you think organisations will start thinking either via third-party providers like your sort of co-working spaces, or they'll say, look, what we rather than 7,000 people in London, we're going to have 1,000 here, 1,000 there, 1,000 there, and we're going to say to the workforce, tip up wherever you need to tip up to when you need to tip up to it. Do you think we're going to see some organisations exploring that, maybe using the government hub program as a bit of inspiration for a solution?
Well, I'd like to think so. I think that would be a good model for people, and it fits with the sort of smart working choice and flexibility that we've talked about, and making working life better for people. So I mean, anything I think that reduces a lot of commuting makes working life better. But I mean, that option has been available for quite a long time, actually, if companies had wanted to take advantage of it. So I think perhaps the thing that could tip the balance is that places away from central cities are cheaper, and and that will have an impact. But and the fact that, of course, that people are more familiar with working away and having remote teams, are more confident about working with remote teams, but also the sense of risk management and resilience, that if you did have an outbreak of a disease in a
local lockdown,
you aren't stymied by it. You have actually got other resources elsewhere. People can go somewhere else. The people in those locations can carry on as normal, even if you've got one group who are unable to do anything other than stay at home. So from that point of view alone, it might well be something that businesses are thinking about their future strategies to be a bit more resilient. But yeah, it's just the fact that everyone has been able to work remotely, and it's worked very well, and it would certainly solve the problem for people who don't have suitable environments at home. If there was somewhere, a proper work environment, but somewhere closer to where they live, that they can go to if they can't work at home. But one of the things that certainly is in the Hubs program, and I think is very isolated little communities, or hardly communities, of people working on their own, doesn't give you that institutional, that organizational feel and culture. And so the statistic of the 18 to 24-year-olds who are working on the sofa and really wanting to get back into corporate life, a lot of that, I think, is not just that they've got a difficult place to work at home, but it's about learning on the job. It's about seeing, having promotion, understanding the business, learning from others. And so if they are not in the place where those senior people are to learn from, those mentors and coaches and examples and role models, that's not going to be the thing that they want. They are wanting to go where those senior people are. So actually you need to think, as the government has been thinking, about actually the whole package being somewhere else, not just outposts of people working in call center type, people just doing desk jobs or whatever, the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. It's the whole thing. You need to have various whole things where people who work there feel they're getting the proper whole experience of the organization. But yes, I mean, it's a great opportunity to do that. And as Anthony was saying, for people who provide workplace services or accommodation, to really think about that experience factor, because people can, vote with their feet and not go there if they don't like it.
The stat I was looking for, one of the team have just pinged it across me. 17% of people said that flexible working options now, in particular, might be a go no go for an organisation. So it's not quite as high as I thought, but still, it's a fifth of the workforce, and that it could be the best talent you're looking for that are a bit more like that. Look, we're just drawing to a close now. I just one last question, I think, and a snappy one at that, and I'm going to point it to you, Perry, because I think what Anthony and Bridget have shown us and explained to us is that there's models that we can adapt. There's ways of thinking. There's to Bridget's point of view, this kind of dispersed work, we could have been doing it for decades, or maybe not decades, but certainly for a significant amount of time. Bridget was talking about, the 90s, she was working remotely. So we've had this at our grasp. Now we might go to it, but outside of our HR community, and now I'm thinking more about their influence in organisation, are managers ready for this? Because this is a whole new way of managing teams that we've not been particularly good at so far, and it's probably middle managers cop a lot of stick for lack of progress. But do you think that this might change that, might change the enthusiasm, or is it still going to be the major barrier to some of these wonderful examples and ideas that we've been discussing?
Again, I think I'll play the Bridget card and say I hope so, but I think it will, because we are are dealing with a different dynamic. We are dealing with a different need of a manager to not be like a clock in, clock out type of supervisor. So I cringe when I see some tools that people have introduced where they have to log stuff on a spreadsheet to show where they've used their time. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And that's proven to be the kind of inefficiencies that we need to get rid of. So Gary Hamill, who's a London Business School professor, often talks about, let's fire all the managers, and he talks about the, sclerotic nature of bureaucracy. And I do think we are starting to pull on that thread now, because I think if you're a business and you want to show productivity, I think you've got to do that with engaged people. And so there are managers out there who are always going to come up trumps because they're going to look after their people and the productivity. Those who are more oppressive, they're going to find a big adverse reaction, I think, and their productivity will probably slump. So I think it perhaps will be more obvious that this more rounded, emotionally intelligent, human-centered manager is going to be the one that leaders are going to go, well, those are the kind of archetypes we need. So I think we have to prove it, but I think we've probably got a better opportunity now to do that than we would have done pre-lockdown. So maybe it's the beginning of the end of that kind of management. That's all I'll say.
What a note to finish on. We're at the beginning of hopefully a change in the right direction. So look, I could talk. I know all three of these panelists, and I've had plenty of conversations about this sort of stuff with them. I could talk forever of them. So I guess from me and from IWFM and everyone on today, thanks for joining us, guys. Thanks for dialing in. Thanks for letting us see your faces, because I know that's the latest thing. I carefully arranged all my trophies and my books just to look more successful. But I've hidden all the Harry Potter books at the back, so I don't look like a complete idiot. But look, thanks for that, guys. And I think the message to everyone watching is that there is change coming, although we're not quite sure what that looks like yet. Attitudes are starting to change, sentiment's starting to change, questions are starting to be asked. So I think it's on us as a professional group of people to adapt to that and to start working with other colleagues around the business to help reform work and reshape the workplace around that. And I think if you look at it through that sort of lens and take Perry's sort of final words there, it could represent some really exciting times. But as Anthony's pointed out, there's going to be some winners and losers in this, and it will be those that adapt, sort of a bit of Darwinism here. It'll be those that adapt to the environment best that will succeed, both on a personal level as individuals and organisationally. And as Bridget's pointed out to us, we can do this. This isn't new. It's just that the opportunity has presented itself. Don't waste a good crisis is one of the phrases that you hear an awful lot. But let's not waste it. Let's really go and investigate some of the material that already exists. Let's use this as an opportunity to talk to leaders in a different way and present different case studies. So thank you everyone for that. Thanks to everyone online for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. We've got more coming up. There'll be a presentation next week, so stay tuned for that. You can register. That'll be coming out in the coming days. Just a few things from us. We've got our Insight Hub, so there's a lot of stuff in there in terms of creating better workplaces. Is some of the material that you can see there, or selling out your workplace vision. So these are all, some of them are free to access, some of them for members only, but do visit the website iwfm.org.uk/insight to download some of the best practice from experts like the ones you've been talking to. And do keep an eye on our COVID-19 resource hub. You'll see that from the top of our website, a resource page that's updated regularly with helpful signposts, updates on the latest developments and how professionals need to help support their organisation. But that's everything from me. So if you've got any case studies, because we're really keen on case studies of what's going on out in the market and out in the real world, ping us a note, policy@iwfm.org.uk. If you've got any questions, any feedback from today, although you will get a feedback link as well for this webinar in particular, but do let us know. Keep in touch, because the opportunity for us is to create this sense of community and help share best practice. So thank you very much. That's everything from me. Speak to you soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.